Alec Bradley, Black Market, Esteli Puro. And the Robusto 5x54. Let's get started. You know, with these ring gauges and not a perfecto cut, I never really went wrong with taking in a V cut. But when you do anything past 50 in terms of ring gauge, always be willing to try and do a rose cut. I'll give you a little bit of a... Bugs are bad. Bugs are real bad. Bugs are real bad. Hold on a second. Whew, much better. Much better. That's what a rose cut looks like. Not the cleanest cut. But if you have a V cutter, most likely it's got a backing so you don't cut too deep. But if you cross hatch it, love that term, especially when you flip a steak and you see those lines. Oh, beautiful. Same thing here. There's nothing wrong with giving it a try. Make sure you got a good blade. You don't have to go too expensive, but don't go too cheap. Full disclosure, I have an affinity for anything that's an Esteli Puro. I'm very hard pressed to find a low quality stick that's labeled as an Esteli Puro. Even if it may be a little too strong, I never found one that was lacking in terms of flavor, boldness, bad burn, nothing of the sorts. I have had this stick before, and I can tell you right now, it's very easy to toast any of these Esteli Puros. And in this particular stick, in this particular size, I will say it's pretty consistent. I have yet to have one with a bad draw upon light up, even through and through. We'll see how it goes through all our thirds. And upon light up, you got a slight creaminess to it, which is not very common with these Habano wrappers. Something with Esteli Puro just takes a lot of those harsh tones that some people will say is harsh, kind of tones them down. Even if you get the diesel Esteli Puro, that thing's like full blown, full bodied, knock your teeth in and punch them back out of your esophagus. But the flavor notes tone it all down, which I can truly appreciate. And there's just something about that region in Nicaragua, in the Esteli region, that just, the crops are good, soil's good. Being educated in the wines part of the hospitality industry, you learn a lot about the word terroir. And that's just the shit that's in the ground. That's what it means. The terroir is what's in the ground when the plant shot up. That's all terroir means. I can tell you right now, the terroir in the Esteli region of Nicaragua, pretty spot on if you want a nice solid stick. Flavor notes on top of that creaminess, you get a nice sweetness and a little bit of leather. That sweetness it's subdued. It's not necessarily like high fructose corn syrup, like some of these flavored sticks that you see out there. It's almost like if you had a bourbon that had a straight corn mash, and like most Americans that are used to a high octane diet of just sugar, we gravitate towards things that are naturally sweet. And corn being naturally sweet, you may gravitate towards this if you want to expand your horizons and you really like your Connecticut's, you like your acid cigars, even Deadwood. Probably more if you enjoy Deadwood. I would highly recommend this if you want to stray away from the aromatic tobacco. And if you're into the acid cigars and other flavored cigars, Macanudo has a great flavored line. You want to expand your horizons beyond flavored cigars, this would be a nice step. Not too offensive, it's not too powerful. Now, this thing's about a medium body through and through, right in the middle. You know, on top of that sweetness, give a little touch up. Whenever you're touching up, you never want that flame directly touching. You only want enough heat to ignite the wrapper. That's why we call it toasting cigars. When you toast your toast, those heating elements are not touching your bread. Same thing when toasting your stick. You never really want the flame directly touching any of the tobacco. So if you have that mixture of leather, sweetness, that cream, I'm getting an odd amount of Connecticut-esque creaminess, and I'm not complaining. Draw is a little snug on this one. It's very likely that you hit a knot right upon light up, and that does happen. We'll see if this opens up while we move into the first third. Alright, wrapping up on this second third. This definitely was a nice, slow burn. So for a Robusto, this is definitely going to be a little longer than what you may be used to. But even though it was a little slower, that draw was still consistent. Didn't hit any knots, had no issues. I will say that natural sweetness definitely fell on the wayside, but I definitely was starting to get some oakiness coming up in terms of your flavor profile, and I started taking over that sweetness, but I still am getting that leather and grass and hay. However, I may not want to have this after a nice steak dinner, you know, but whatever floats your boat, it's up to you, you know, it's about what you like. If it was up to me, if I want to have a certain type of food prior, you were at a barbecue, which is a nice backyard barbecue smoke, you had a choice between burgers, ballpark drinks, and brats, you know, because a lot of people like having brats now since pellet grills have become mainstream. Go for that brat with a nice hearty mustard or some caramelized onions, or if they got a nice handmade burger that they made right in their home, definitely can't go wrong with that. If you have a smoke after this, or even not just a whiskey but a nice hearty high acid beer, definitely would recommend the cigar with it. Although the oakiness is starting to take over and that grass and hay is taking over, it's still such a pleasant aroma. It's still a nice, pleasant draw that you're not really going to be complaining, even though the sweetness is falling away. And let's see what final third has in store for us. Okay, so wrapping up into the first third, I will say, just like I suspected, that draw did open up very nicely. It was just a knot at the end, which sometimes just happens. Sometimes you can get them in the middle of the cigar, but just because you have a bad draw at a certain point, or even at the beginning, doesn't mean it's going to be a bad draw throughout. That leather and sweetness is still very prominent. However, I'm getting some earthy notes, tiny bit of that grass and hay, that if you ever had the privilege to have a Cuban cigar for once in your life, you will know what I mean when I say that. Although that grass and hay does not take over the entire cigar. Just like my last one with the CAO Extreme, that one had more of a brightness to it. It wasn't as earthy, and even though it had earthy tones in it, it wasn't as prevalent as it is in here. And I will say this is definitely a chewier smoke, a creamier taste, and a nicer mouthfeel in terms of every draw. It lasts a little longer. If those you see in blind tastings in wines, beers, liquors, such as the whiskey that I'm having now, you will sometimes hear something called what is the finish, and that's how long it lasts. Aside from the fact that people will just be like, that's what she said, you also have to take into account that it does last longer on your palate more than others. This definitely lasts longer on my palate than other cigars that I've had, especially in recent times. And in warmer weather, I find it to be a little hard. I'm a little hard pressed to find a longer lasting finish on every draw. But that's the beauty of a cigar. You can just replenish that finish for an extended period of time as much as you'd like. And for what I'm pairing it with, I wouldn't pair it with really a peaty scotch. I would not even give it a strong red bold wine. I would definitely try to pair this with a Pinot Noir if you really want to go the route. I wouldn't do anything too sweet or too thick. Pair it with something in the middle of the road that's in terms of body and strength. And if you want to complement with something sweeter in terms of your liquors or your whiskeys, definitely would recommend nice Buffalo Trace. That corn sweetness will complement the natural sweetness that's in this cigar. And the coating and the mouthfeel that you'll get from the naturally sweet bourbon that is Buffalo Trace, which there's many out there, but this is just an example. Or a Bird Dog 7-year, no bias there. That has a nice sweetness and a nice coating to it as well. And as we move forward, let's see how this opens up and see if there's any transitions in terms of the flavor, because I have not gotten that yet. However, I'm not complaining with what's entering my palate now. Alright, reaching the end of this Alec Bradley Esteli Puro in the Robusto size. And I have to say, wasn't a ton of transitions, but really can't complain. That oakiness that was really starting to take over the flavor profile definitely was taking over entirely the sweetness. The sweetness was gone towards the end in that final third, and that oakiness just took over the sweetness completely. Whilst in the final third, it still had that creaminess through and through. But in terms of diversity and flavors, it was definitely very straightforward. It definitely didn't deviate far from that creaminess, that grass and hay, that slight sweetness in the beginning. And then when that oakiness started coming up, that sweetness started to falter, and definitely in the final third, that oakiness just completely took over. But I'm not gonna lie to you, not gonna complain, because there's nothing wrong with those types of flavor notes, whether or not freaking lanternfly. Not gonna lie, those flavor notes, couldn't really ask for much more in a stick. Although it may not be completely diverse, it still was a solid stick through and through. My final score came out to a 91. It had a razor sharp burn. I only had one touch up. It ashed twice in the Robusto size. And for something that thick of a ring gauge, and I don't know if you can see, that ash is really nice and tight. Sometimes it can go just fly out, flare out, and it's all loose. And I've had cigars where you as much as look at it the wrong way, you're gonna ash. This wasn't the case. Construction was solid. The flavors were relatively consistent with that one minor transition that I aforementioned. Overall, very great cigar. And if you're curious what I was drinking with this Black Market Esteli Puro, I had an Evan Williams 1792. It is relatively sweeter. Nothing too powerful, but that's quite all right. Similar to this. Solid bourbon with a solid cigar. And I'm gonna let this die with dignity. And I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.